I think let me just get to it. Let me firstly welcome Dr. Yaacob, Professor Yaacob, to our first session in this series, Teh Tarik with Walid. And the idea is really to get politicians on so that we will discuss politics and policies and have an open discussion. And you were the first person who I ever invited as a guest speaker in my class. And I thought I wanted you as the first person for this as well. So thank you for obliging as always. So
my pleasure.
Just an introduction on the series and then on Professor Yaacob before we get to the questions. So I will hopefully not be asking softball questions like, what do you think about before you sleep? If you were not a politician, what would you do? I'll leave that to Mothership.
Okay.
But I will hopefully ask tough questions, but fair questions. And I won't ask gotcha questions. The point is not to ask yes or no questions and not let you or any guest have time to provide nuanced answers, because politics and policies are complex, often require nuanced answers. So I hope we will have the time for that. So the target is about 40 minutes. Because I've been told that's from my students, that's the attention span on a good day for students. So hopefully. Yes, and everybody knows Professor Yaacob. He was the Minister of Environment and Water Resources. His last post was the Information and Communication. Before that was named Information, Communication and the Arts, I think until 2012, right?
Yes.
And you were also Minister, if I remember correctly, Community of Development and Sports. Right?
Yep,
At that time it was called?
From 2002 to 2004, yes.
All right, okay. So, and Minister of Muslim Affairs as well. And
yes, throughout that 16 years, yes.
Throughout that 16 years, right. So a veteran. And he was also the Vice Chairman of the PAP. So you went through a lot of screening and recruitment as well of candidates, right?
Yes, candidates, yes.
Right, so former Vice Chairman of PAP. So we are... and he is recently retired, so today we'll get the liberated version of Professor Yaacob.
I hope so.
Okay, so let's get to it. My first question for you is, on your retirement, should I say congratulations or commiseration?
No, I've always said it's mixed feelings of both sad and happy. Sad because, I'm leaving 23 years of my life behind in Kolam Ayer, not just in the constituency, but of course 16 years as a minister and 23 years as a backbencher. So there's a lot of things that have happened in my life. And, sometimes you feel all of a sudden there's a void. You still have attachment for Kolam Ayer, but, you can't go back because there's a new man there. You don't want to, be there when he has to try and build up his case. Happy right. Because now I have more time. Obviously, my Sundays, my weeknights are now free. Time for me to do other things that I always wanted to do. Catch up on my reading, catch up on my writing. Of course, catching up with my family also, basically, because kids have grown and obviously even though they are older, they still want to spend time. So, and of course, I must not forget my wife, who's been around with me for the last 30 over years, and I need to spend more time with her and the things that we always wanted to do, basically. So it's both sad and happy, and, I'll try and find the right balance at some point in time, basically. And I, in fact, promised to my constituents that I met when I was helping out in the campaign recently that I'll be back. I go to the market, I have food at the hawker center, and once in a while I drop by and just to show my face there, because, I know those people. And I know when I go to the hawker center, they give me the best food, when I ask them, they say, no problem. And I'm happy for the relationship that I have built up over these years. Basically.
Right. So there's a comment that says that he or she took his or her K2 graduation photo with you. So that's how long you have been there.
Oh my God.
Okay. So GE 2020, what went wrong for your party?
No, actually, what went right is the most important question. We won the election, right?
Okay.
So we won the election, right? Must not forget that, it was a hard-fought battle and we won 60%. Yes, as PM mentioned on the conference, we hope the numbers could have been better. So obviously, I think there's a lot of reflection that needs to be done. And this is something which all parties go through. I've been involved in 5 elections, and after every election, we do a deep dive to find out where we have sort of done well and where we need to improve. There's no doubt about that. I think the conventional wisdom will tell you that, we basically did not get the voters of the younger population. What went wrong, what happened, I think we have to go and study it. But, you read the report today by ST that in January or February, in fact, the young was with us.
Right,
so
exactly.
Obviously something shifted, right? And what caused that shift? That's something that we have to look back and see whether or not we can sort of prevent that from happening in the future. So I think that's it. I just want to say also that I think the manifesto was actually the right one because, of course, the economy was very important. Jobs was very important. But obviously, it did not capture everything else that was on people's minds, basically. And that's something which we need to study carefully. I think several ministers have said we have to do some really deep soul searching, and I hope we do, right? We do so that we can understand and that we can perform better. So all in all, I think, it's not a bad result. It's not a great result. But certainly, with this result, we can move forward and learn, and then hopefully we can improve as we go along.
Right. I think that's a fair assessment, and I want to unpack that a little because, as you rightly said, I think the Straits Times report today, for those who have not read, should read it because it's an interesting empirical question. If that is true, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. That means the votes were lost during the campaigning.
Yes.
Right?
I would agree to that because I was involved in the campaign for 9 days. I helped out. I walked around, and you can safely say that our vote bank is with the elderly, and every elderly home that I go, they would say no problem. Every young person that open up the door will say, "Let me think about it." Then something is not right, right? So you get that sense that something has shifted. And so what exactly? Is it because of the incident with the WP? Is it because, we appear to be too arrogant or something like that? I think that's something we have to study carefully. I mean, we have now time to look back, and you're absolutely right. I think something shifted during that 9 days. And I think the party stalwarts and leaders also knew that. You could see that we also shifted our campaign towards the end of the last few days, basically, right? So in a sense, in a way, we read the ground correctly. We've understood it, but maybe it's a bit too late. But we're able to read the ground and change, and change gear. So in that sense, the machinery is working, but maybe we could have picked up those signals much earlier. That would have been better, basically. Yeah.
Right. So from my own conversations so there are two things that I wanted to ask you on. One is from my own conversations, I think the younger people and minorities, so of all ages, were extremely uncomfortable with what they perceived as the unfair treatment of Raisa.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And as you know, actually, I can speak for the Muslims at least. The median voter for the Muslim is quite a conservative voter. But right? But they also felt very uncomfortable at what happened. And the younger people of all races, the Chinese as well, they were absolutely uncomfortable. And the fact that Minister Shanmugam acknowledged that sort of, right?
Yes.
And I think the term soul searching is a huge one.
Yes, indeed. I think I think that's a right declaration on the part of the ministers that we need to do a deep dive. On the issue of the young, I have 2 young first-time voters at home.
Right. What did they say? What were their thoughts on the entire incident?
To be very candid, they were not happy. They were not happy in how she's been treated. Rightly or wrongly, to them, you have to investigate. But when you bring it out in the middle of the election, it doesn't appear fair. That's their perception, basically, right? We had a long family argument, and of course, they are adults and they have to know the situation. But I think that caused a lot of it. Even throughout the campaign, there was some sense that we need to basically reach out to the young, because when we did this, I think it could have been a tipping point for young people, because before that, people did say, let me think about what the PAP has to offer, But I think that may have been the tipping point. And people suddenly realize this is not the kind of politics that you need, you want to have in Singapore. So, I think we have to learn from the experience entirely. It doesn't mean what she said was right. We have to separate. That
Of
has
course,
to be
understand.
investigated.
Understand.
And I also appreciate Mr. Pritam Singh's comment that we have to investigate after the election and everything like that. I think that's fair. But I think at the moment of the battle, when you do something like that, it means that people are uncomfortable and they're not happy with it, basically. Especially
Okay.
young people, basically. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'll get to the second thought I had on the younger, older voter dichotomy or cleavage.
Yes.
But now that you mentioned Pritam, would you agree with me that he was the man of the match of this election?
My honest opinion, he came out very well. I have to be fair to him. I have seen all the videos. He appeared very composed, very relaxed. And I think when he fronted the whole incident, if I'm not mistaken, Saturday night when they had the press conference
Right.
with the whole team,
Right.
I mean, he showed leadership. I have to give
Right.
that to him. He showed leadership that I am the leader. I have to take this, and I had to tell the way forward, basically. So all in all, I thought he did pretty well. That's my honest opinion. I have to give that to him, basically. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thanks for your candid answers. And I told you guys we'll get the liberated version. But Professor Yaacob has always been fair to me personally, at least in spite of our vast disagreements. So, I've always appreciated that. So, the other thing I wanted to say, this younger voter thing, although whatever I said earlier, I still stand by it with regards to my interactions with younger voters. But I think there's more to that as well. Now, you've shared your family arguments. I want to share a little about my own family arguments. A person in my family, an elderly person in my family, is a lifelong PAP voter. And on the second day of campaigning, he told me that he will be voting for the opposition this time because of Tan Cheng Bock. He said, if Tan Cheng Bock left the party already, and now he's not a West Coast voter, but he says, so I'm thinking, apart from the younger electorate, is there something in Tan Cheng Bock's defection where Tan Cheng Bock represents the old PAP, rightly or wrongly, okay? Because I think there are questions that we need to ask of Tan Cheng Bock as well.
Sure.
Especially if he's disavowing the party, right? So I would love to have him on and ask him this question. So is there something on the part of voters looking at Tan Cheng Bock as representing? So they like the PAP, but they don't like the 3G or maybe 4G more. And Tan Cheng Bock represents a return to that.
Well, I did. To be honest, I did not pick up that vibe during that 9 days of campaigning.
Right. Okay.
And his name never figured in all our conversation. But among my own circles, there are people who felt that he was a game changer in the West, basically. My honest opinion, I never expected him to do so well. Because even though Dr. Tan Cheng Bock was a party member, but he left long time ago.
Right.
He left long time ago,
right.
way before the 2011 presidential election, right? I mean, if my memory serves me right, he stepped down in 2006. So, and then after that, he must have parted company for whatever reason, and then he decided to contest the election in 2011. So I wouldn't consider him as sort of a hangover from the OPAP, right? And in a way, I think the nostalgia among old people, if you ask me honestly speaking, is actually the Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. That came out a lot. You know, that came out a lot. So
did Lee Hsien Yang play a part then? If the loyalty is... Oh, okay.
Hardly. It was always about, Lee Kuan Yew did a lot. Lee Kuan Yew said, thank you, ma'am, kind of thing. Basically, you get that kind of feeling, basically. But I can't, say for certain based on the 9 days that there was a Tan Cheng Bock factor. At least in Jalan Besar, I can't say that, basically. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. So last one on the election specifically, and then we'll move to broader issues. This election was built as a referendum towards the 4G, right? So how do they move forward? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it doesn't look good for them. And what would your advice be as a seasoned campaigner? What would your advice to them be moving forward?
No, I think the 4G knows what they need to do. And the simple answer is that they have to reconnect themselves with the ground. It's as simple as that, basically, right? I go back to something which MM used to say this, and MM used to say that I should be able to shake your hand and look into your eyes and see whether I can trust you to look after my affairs, In not so many words, but that's what he used to say. Basically, I think that reconnection between the 4G and the ground has to take place. Having said that, I think we have to be fair to the 4G. some of the ministers have done quite well at the ground. I'll be very candid with that, right?
Agreed.
I think Mr. Lawrence Wong, notwithstanding what people may say about his handling of the COVID, he has come across very well on top of the situation. And I think, in terms of his personality, I know him quite well. I think he's basically a sort of person who's prepared to listen more, rather than to tell you that I have the answer and you follow me, basically. Minister Ong Ye Kung, for example, I don't know him well enough, but I know of him and I've interacted with him to know that I think he has the ability to connect, basically. Mr. Desmond Lee actually is a fantastic minister to me. Quiet, resolute, but capable, done well at MSF. And you ask the social service sector, they like him because they know that he's genuine, he's honest. So I think there are people within the 4G ministers that actually can do that, and I'm sure the rest of Seoul can do that. I think we have to reconnect. And more importantly, I think there has to be something that is associated with the 4G as a vision, right? I don't know you remember this when PM Goh Chok Tong was about to take over, their vision was Swiss standard of living by 2020. Right. Yeah, there was something that you could pin down the 4G, the PM Goh's generation, that this is one. I think you need something like that also for the 4G, and they talk about a crisis of a generation. I think this whole discussion about what a post-COVID world will look like, it should be headed by the 4G. It should be the 4G determining what Singapore will be like, and then we can then relate to that, or at least have a discussion with that this is the path that this group of ministers will lead me to, basically, I think that would be an exciting conversation. I hope to see that conversation about what a post-COVID world will be like, and how the 4G is going to shape that world together with us Singaporeans. I think that would be exciting. And there are many opportunities. Today I was involved in a conversation, on experiential learning. How would experiential learning take place in a post-COVID world, right? When you actually cannot go out physically, you have to do Zoom meetings and so on and so forth. But there are things that can be done. But you probably need certain changes, not necessarily policies, but other changes to facilitate, experiential learning and so on and so forth. So I think the conversation is quite exciting. I like it, basically. So I like to see the 4G taking that and using that as a basis on which they engage Singaporeans. I think that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. I think that is very sound advice, and I hope they take it seriously. And interestingly, the ministers you mentioned, probably if we were to do a straw poll, right, amongst Singaporeans, most of them would say Ong Ye Kung has done. Ong Ye Kung. Sorry, I should know that he's a Minister of Education. Minister Ong Ye Kung has done really well, especially I absolutely love what I thought was his enlightened policy with regards to the schools. Yes. He resisted closing schools, and he said it would hurt the lower income more. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And Lawrence Wong, I think, would be high up on a lot of people's minds as well. So interesting. I just noticed that I'm really not trying to be naughty. Okay, I noticed that you didn't mention DPM Heng or Minister Chan Chun Sing, who are the top two.
But you do realize the reason why I mentioned the other ministers, because DPM Heng and Minister Chan received a lot of limelight during the 90s of campaign. Right. Okay. Basically. So I think people can judge for themselves.
Fair enough. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. So there are a lot of Muslim-specific issues that I will not deal with. Not that because the questions are unfair, because you were the Minister of Muslim Affairs, and I have asked you many of those questions myself. But I think this is not the platform, and majority of the audience are not from. They are from other faiths or maybe no faiths. But I'll deal with the broader questions on race and religion, I guess, where everybody can relate to that. So this election we saw. Many minorities leading GRCs and winning. Minister Iswaran, Minister Shanmugam, Minister Vivian, Minister SM Taman, Mr. Pritam Singh, Masagos, and then you have Mr. Murali in the SMC. And you yourself led a GRC twice and won.
Yeah.
So what's the relevance of the GRCs then if the minorities seem to be able to win?
No, I suppose as a concept, like any other political concept, it will evolve over time, right? I think PM has made it a promise to reduce the average size. So this time around, we have smaller GRCs, more SMCs. And as you rightly pointed out, the SMCs have done well actually on their own. Even, Mr. Murali did well in Bukit Batok. And previously, of course, Mr. Michael Palmer in Punggol East, to show that minorities can also hold on their own in the SMC. So I wouldn't want to prejudge what the government will think about how the political structure or the whole constituency structure will take place. But certainly the data shows that maybe we have arrived at a level of maturity where people look beyond race, right? Maybe when conceived the idea of the GRC, we were not there yet, right? Political maturity takes time. I'll be honest about it. I mentioned this in one of my interviews. Somebody asked me what was my greatest achievement in 23 years. I see my greatest achievement in 23 years as an MP is that all of them never questioned my race. Never questioned my race, right? Because in effect, what we do there, we do it as an elected representative. It doesn't really matter you're Malay or Chinese or Indian. Everyone is a Singaporean that deserves help. So I think the GRC concept will evolve over time. I think something that have to be looked at, basically. Will we remove it and revert to all an SMC? I'm not so sure. I wouldn't want to prejudge that, basically. But I certainly would recommend relooking at the whole concept, looking at what we have. Because I think it has to be something that we evolve over time as we achieve certain political maturity.
Would you think that, I am quite supportive of the GRCs actually, and I still am. Sure. Although I think I have to rethink that as well, looking at the data we have. Especially in Aljunied, we had 3 minorities.
Exactly.
3 minorities. And also, if we look at, you mentioned that your constituents never saw you as a Malay leader. They saw you as a, right?
Yes.
And nobody sees SM Taman as an Indian leader.
Exactly.
Or Pritam Singh as an Indian leader. They see him as a national leader.
Exactly.
So that tells us something, right, about GRCs and race. So is it true that Singapore is still not ready for a non-Chinese PM?
I thought you're not going to ask me difficult questions. I wouldn't say I've done a straw poll to come to any conclusion, but based on my own interaction, and I will add here, we both Malays and non-Malays. I think people feel that SM Taman is certainly way above everybody else and capable of becoming a prime minister. I think we cannot take that away from him. I know him well enough to work with him in cabinet, that he's a very capable man. So I think it's that's all I can tell you in terms of what I've heard, what I've shared, what I've said, basically.
Right. Yeah. So I would like to maybe push it a little bit on that and maybe defend DPM Heng on his statement, because I don't think he was not right actually when he said some Singaporeans are not ready. Yeah. Although I think as a generic non-Chinese, maybe some Singaporeans are not ready. But for SM Taman, I think many Singaporeans are ready. So basically, does it mean that a minority always has to be heads and shoulders above everybody else? You don't think so?
I think the right answer for me is that maybe we're not ready for minority PM, but we're ready for Taman.
Right.
Because
I agree.
In a way, people see SM Taman as a very capable person, and they don't see his race. So it's two different things, basically. So I suspect if you do a survey, even among older Chinese, I suspect they say, Taman very good. I suspect. I may be wrong. So I have to add the caveat. I've not done a poll. I have no idea, but that's how I think it should be seen, basically.
Okay. So on the broader topic of race and religion, and especially Minister Ong Ye Kung has said just now that schools have to relook, and Minister Shanmugam have said as well. So so practically, how do we do that without always using the harsh stick of the law whenever somebody says something wrong? Or should we allow for people to make mistakes when they are discussing race and religion? What do you think? It's a very tricky situation.
It's a very tricky situation, a very fine line, and some people will cross the line, mistakes will happen. I think it's always a question of what we do with the mistakes, and I think more should be done to understand why it happened, and so that we can, in a way, explain to the rest of the community why we think this is not desirable. I think the OB markers or the red line is very difficult to define. But I would welcome what Minister Ong Ye Kung has mentioned and Mr. Shanmugam has mentioned, that young people are looking at race from a different perspective and therefore we need to have a new framework. I welcome that. I think the acknowledgement that we need to sort of have something new is very healthy, right? If you ask me now, I have no idea how to do it, okay?
Right.
You know me personally that I can have very private conversation, but publicly I think it's going to be something, be of a challenge basically, right? But ultimately, I think when we talk about race and religion, I mean, there are very simple rules that we must avoid. I mean, if you insult a race or religion, that's really bad, right? But if you come out and say, I think this is what the Malay community is all about, and I'm not sure whether it's right, then you can debate it based on facts and data and what have you, basically, right? So I would welcome an honest discussion, right? You feel that there's something wrong with the Malay community. Tell me why. Tell me why based on the facts. Then I can bring my facts to have a discussion. I think that should be healthy. But if you start insulting the community, insulting other people's religion, I think that's no. So I think that line is very clear, right? Because why you want to antagonize people? Why do you want to feel, But if you feel something is not right and you have a certain view and you want to advance it, by all means, and then have a discussion. And then if you're proven wrong, you should retract your position. I think that is what should happen. But can this happen at every level of society? I am not so sure, right? Because I think this is something has to be an informed discussion based on data that you have and the facts that you know of, basically. I would welcome, I mean, if any non-Malay want to have a discussion with me about the state of the Malay families, for example, I would welcome that. And in fact, people have written about it, right? Tanya Lai and so on and so forth have written about the Malay community. I don't find it upsetting. I read it to understand, some of which I don't agree, right? And some of which I agree. So I think if we can have an honest discussion at that level, I think that's okay, right? We don't have to agree with everything that you say, right? But at the end of the day, as long as it's based on facts, data, and something which is very clear, I think we can have an honest discussion.
Right. Okay. So still on that, and I wanted to get your thoughts as well, because the GRC system is such that a Malay or an Indian is typically elected because he or she is Malay or Indian, right? And he or she is expected to represent the Malay and Indian communities. But the Malay and Indian candidate is elected by Chinese, essentially. Mostly Chinese, majority Chinese. So the majority of the constituents that you are elected by is not the constituents that you are supposed to serve. So in the sense that minority MPs have two constituents. So you as ministers, you have three constituents. You serve the entire country as a minister. You serve Jalan Besar or Molmin Kalang, right? Kolamai as your MP. But you serve the Muslim community, Malay community as a Malay MP. How do you balance that? Because, and I think I never saw the balance, or I never knew where the line was. On one hand, you are supposed to be Malay. On the other hand, you cannot be too Malay.
No, I think first of all, the GRC system was not created so that there is a Malay to represent the Malay community. I think the GRC system was created to allow minority representation in Parliament, so that our Parliament reflects our society, right? That's the logic. And as you rightly pointed out, as an idea, it is definitely something that we can support, because we do want our Parliament to reflect our society, right? So that there's a balance of different communities in Parliament. So that's the first thing. What I do personally, and I think what other Malay PAP MPs do for the Malay community, is because we are part of the community and the community expects us to help them in one way or the other, right? So in my case, of course, it was slightly different because I have the title of Minister of Muslim Affairs. So every Muslim in Singapore is part of my responsibility in terms of the laws governing them and so on and so forth. So I think by and large, based on my own observation, 23 years, I think all the PAP Malay MPs have actually, in fact, done quite well in terms of balancing that. So you look at the Hansard and look at the questions raised by, like, say, Mr. Saktiandi or Mr. Zainal Sapari or Dr. Intan, Mr. Rahayu and all that. The range of questions raised across the whole spectrum, not just on Malay community, right? If anything, they raise a lot of Malay issues only during the budget debate, only because there is a segment on Muslim affairs, right? So I think that balancing act is all right. And when we go out, you're absolutely right. We do have the added constituency. So, we have to attend Malay functions, we go to Malay organizations, not because we have to, but we want to also because whether or not, we attend or not, they are still voters. They are still part of the constituency. They're still part of the Singapore framework, Singapore fabric, you see. So I don't see that as a problem, but it is, of course, an added burden for all of us. But I would gladly tell you that all of my colleagues, when I was in Parliament, they look forward to it. They don't see this as a challenge. And I think being close to the Malay community helps us also to have ears on the ground to understand what the needs of the concern of the community. And I can be honest here, when I was minister, when I do receive certain feedback from the Malay ground, which I think requires the attention of our senior leaders, I bring it to their attention, right? That's my job. So, we need to alert what is going on, what is unhappiness, and so on and so forth, so that senior leaders can decide whether there needs a policy change or something needs to be done. So for my 16 years as Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs, I make it a point to make sure that I always brief our senior leaders so that they don't understand what the Malay community is going through, what are the challenges. So by and large, I think it's not a problem so far.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Last one on race and religion in general.
Yeah.
So the Workers' Party candidate Fadli Fauzi, he talks about looking at issues, socio-economic issues through a class rather than a racial lens.
Yeah.
And I thought this is something you would appreciate as a student of Professor Hussein Alatas. And I thought this was something. What are your thoughts on that? This is an audience question, by the way. So
no, I totally agree with him, but I have a small caveat. Let me start with the first part. I agree. At the end of the day, we have to look at it not from a racial point of view, but from an economic point of view or social point of view, see what is happening and how we can deal with that problem. But yet, at the same time, I think you also need some inputs from the community that may be affected the most, right? And are there certain factors within that community that need some attention, right? Let me give a recent example which all of us are familiar with, basically. I would say, and I will add a caveat that I don't have the data, but I would say, predominantly home-based businesses are largely Malays, right? And we saw this in the recent episode, basically. Right. And they were affected by the COVID-19 and so on and so forth. Now, I think it requires somebody who has an understanding of the community, why home-based businesses are important, so that I can come in and say, okay, I need to do something and help you. We have a national concern, which is COVID-19. How do I deal with this issue and to help you, basically? So I think both sort of lenses, if I use their lenses, help one another, basically, rather than trying to say it is a Malay problem. All right? No, it is a problem at the national level, but one part of that national community is facing a lot more challenges, and how do you deal with that, basically? You need policies at the national level, or do you want to go in and say, okay, maybe I need to understand this community better and how I can affect a change in a positive direction? So I would caveat that way, basically. So he's not wrong, but I think at the same time, I think understanding of what is going on in the community will be very helpful for us to formulate policies. I mean, you can look at many policies that has helped the Malay community, even though it was a national policy, like, trying to increase home ownership, for example, right? Because there were a lot of Malays in rental blocks at one time. I think it has helped a lot of the Malay community, even though it was not seen from a Malay angle, but it was very helpful to the Malay community. And when I was an MP and a minister, I always try to promote the Malays who are staying in rental blocks to become homeowners as much as possible through the various schemes that the government has planned out.
Right. So I'll move on because we only have about 10 minutes left, and maybe we can extend 15 minutes left. But I think, I don't know, you don't have to say anything. I think the home-based business issue wasn't well handled from the get-go. And that is why President Halimah had to step in as well. I mean, that's all. I don't need a comment. I just wanted to say that. The next question is on the cabinet, and you held a few positions, and I think probably is it fair to say that the Ministry of Information Communication, that was a highest portfolio you held? Or,
yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's first time ever by a Malay, basically.
Right. So that would be the highest. Have you ever gone to the PM and said, I want this? I mean, and I'm thinking, right? I'm just thinking, I'm just thinking from an educator to an educator.
Well,
I'm sure, as a professor, I'm sure you would have wanted the Ministry of Education, for instance. It's
I,
natural.
I can't say all those things because I'm sworn to
Okay.
the official secrets.
Understand,
Right?
understand,
But
understand.
if you ask me, yeah, I would have loved to be at the education ministry.
Right,
It's
right,
indeed very challenging,
right.
shaping the next generation. But as a Muslim, we have to take what is given. You're grateful, you're grateful, and you do the best you can, basically.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
By the way, I also think that we have had some fantastic education ministers as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Sam Taman, DPM
Yeah,
Heng, and
yeah, yeah.
Minister Ong Ye
Oh,
Kung.
you can. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether that has been on your mind. But okay, so there was a question on censorship since you were the Minister of Information and Communication and the Arts. So there is a saying which goes that if you want to check the soul or the soul of a nation, you check the state of the arts.
Yeah.
Right. For me, I agree. I agree with that with one caveat. I think another way to check the soul of a nation is through the voting patterns. But I definitely agree that the arts is an important part of our society. But with censorship, actual or self-censorship, is very difficult for the arts to flourish.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think when you look back, the honest truth is that when I took over the ministry in 2011, when we look back across maybe 10, 20, 30 years, starting with actually the report by the late Mr. Ong Teng Cheong, to build the Renaissance City, I think there has been a lot of movement in terms of relaxing. You can never reach to a point where both sides will agree. That's the honest truth, basically, right? Let me give one example, which I thought is an interesting example, but it doesn't relate to the arts. It's more to the internet. Because one of my first acts when I became Minister for Communications and the Arts was we came out with the online licensing sites, basically. And it was a big hoo-ha. The internet community was very upset, and they basically said this is going to curtail the internet and it's a form of censorship and so on and so forth. Through a good friend of mine, I will not mention names, I had a meeting with a lot of these people at an institution to explain why we're coming from. I mean, they disagree with me, but they appreciate the opportunity to discuss with the minister. After we implemented the law, we only licensed about 10 sites. And then, years go by, nothing has happened to the internet. So, I mean, I met one of them a couple of years later. I say, look, you remember the discussion we had, right? So at the end of the day, the point I'm trying to make of the example is that sometimes when we act, primarily because we think there is a certain purpose. So in this case, it was after the 2011 election, and there were a lot of sites, right? They were commenting on Singapore affairs and so on and so forth, and they were not licensed. In a way for them to be held responsible. Not we're going after them, but you made a comment, you must be held responsible, right? So I think in the arts, it's also a similar way. We want to relax as much as possible, but how do we do it? Maybe sometimes we come across a particular show or a film that we think has crossed the line, and we need to deal with that, basically, right? And so when we deal with that, people assume we're trying to clamp on the arts. We are not. There was a specific problem with that particular script. In fact, you can ask some of the artists, after 2011, Alfian actually had a play. And had a play, basically. I can't remember the title, but it went through, came to my table, everybody looked at it and all that stuff. We made some minor changes, but by and large, we allowed it. And he was commenting on the 2011 elections, right? Because when we lost our junior GRC and all that stuff. So I think to be fair to the government, we have always trying our very best to make sure that the space for the arts continue to grow. That I can speak with conviction because I was in the ministry for 7 years. And, I was in the ministry, but arts portfolio left me and went to Mr.
Right.
Lawrence Wong. But we were the regulator. And whenever something comes across our table, we always want to see whether or not we can find a way to, for the lack of a better word, to see how we can make sure that the show can go on. Can we work with the producers and what have you? So I'd be very candid. All my officials in the ministry, the last thing we want is just to clamp down. Certain shows, clearly, there are some groups that we don't allow for obvious reasons and what have you, basically, but the vast majority, I had never been an attempt by the government. I think all of us would want to see the flourishing of the arts, certainly, basically. And in fact, you look now, there have been a lot of plays cynical of some government policies of the party. And I don't think you ask them, has anything happened to them? We have not. So I think, you must always understand from the government's point of view, it's a lot more easier for us to allow everything, less headache for us. But I think we also have to safeguard, because we live in a multiracial society. We do not know how that play will react. I mean, you remember the famous Indian Muslim play Talak?
Talak,
You remember? Yeah.
Yes.
People forget that I was intimately involved in that play. And I went to the opening. I was invited.
Right.
I was young, but over the years, people realized that it was not something, and so on and so forth. So I think that it has to be not been allowed. But at that time, I thought it was a useful play to discuss about what is happening in the Indian Muslim community. But obviously, our Indian Muslim community leaders were not happy. We consulted them and we agreed with them. And I think eventually, the minister at that time, I can't remember, it was Dr. Lee or whoever, they made the decision that we shouldn't allow it. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think there's always an attempt to reach out to the artists to understand, so that we can come to a certain position that both can agree with. Basically.
Right. It sounds like you're a fan of Alfian.
Yeah.
By the way, the comments. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
I love his works. I read all his works, basically. And I have to tell you this, and this is a real story. When I was still a young sort of backbencher, I went to a conference in Trinidad and Tobago, way in the Caribbean, and I brought one of his books, right? Maybe the first one, One Angry Hour or something like that. And in that conference, there was a Trinidadian poet who happens to be a politician. So we were talking of poetry, and then I said, I have this book from a young Singaporean. Would you like to see it? So he took home and read it. He came back the next day and said, this is wonderful. He said, I've never seen this writing before and all that stuff. You see, I never had a chance to tell Alfian that, basically. But the point is that he's talented, and we cannot take that away from him, basically. Yeah.
So someone who knows Alfian, please pass the message to him. I am also a fan of his voice, and I think he's a voice we need. We don't have to agree with everything he says,
exactly.
But he's a voice.
Exactly.
He's a voice we need in the country.
Yeah.
So on censorship still, and it's beyond the arts, right? And that may be your position, and that may be the official government position. But with the idea that your plays can be censored, or even with POFMA around, the worry is, and not just POFMA, there are other laws as well. The worry is you do not need to get to the stage where the government censors you. People censor themselves. And I'm going to quote somebody you know pretty well, Professor Chiran George. he says a lot of censorship in Singapore actually happens through self-censorship. And it's not directly through the government, but because of the OB markers and the ambiguity of what is moral, what is not, what is acceptable, what is not. So what is your comment on that self-censorship?
I think if it's happening, it's unfortunate. I think young Singaporeans especially should, for my honest opinion, push the boundaries a bit more. I think in any society, this is basically an ongoing process of negotiations between the authorities and the artists. That's a fact of life, right? Some people try it and then, okay, they cross too much and then they get sort of pushed back. Others try it and they get away with it. So I don't have an answer for that. But, I think it's a pity if our young creative talents feel that they need to self-censor themselves. We will lose something, right? And at this point in time in our society as a nation, where we are developing, and I think we are, I wouldn't say we have reached to a level of 100% maturity where we can respect race, language, and religion. I think there are still areas in which we can evolve. And I really like to see not just as young people, but our artists evolving that together with society. It would be a pity. Then we will lose out in the potential of a good play, of a good writing, and so on and so forth. So I would recommend, don't hold back and, give your best shot and see what happens.
Okay. So we do not have any more time. Do you have any final things that you wanted to say that I didn't get to ask on, or anything that you wanted to get off your chest?
No, I'm out of politics, but I'm still a party member. Never forget that, basically. I'm still a member of the PAP, and I will continue to be a member. I think the most important thing to all the young people who's listening in, I appreciate what, they feel and how they feel about Singapore. I'm always reminded by MM. MM always say, he doesn't care who's in charge as long as Singapore is safe and survive, basically, because that's the most important thing. In all of these things, I think the most important thing is that Singapore as a nation that we know can continue to thrive, prosper, and is led well. So as Imam says, if the PAP cannot run it and there's another party that can run it, then you should let the party to run it because it's the future of Singapore. I think that's important, right? So we are in this together. We're in the same boat, basically, right? Maybe not a sampan, we're in the same boat, basically, right? But we have to make sure, right, no matter what our differences are, basically, that we can continue to survive. I mean, that's a fact of life. People don't like the fact that PAP talk about JOS. But hey, it's a reality, It's a reality whether you like it or not, right? You need to be able to have gainful employment. But I will be the first to admit that as a society, we can change how we look at people who are out of work, or people who are working, how we can support each other, and so on and so forth. I think that COVID-19 has shown that there is something in the Singapore spirit that we're capable of doing under a lot of pressure. If we can ensure that spirit continue to prevail, I think we will have a better Singapore. So to me, to all the young people out there, let's work to build a better Singapore, right? At the end of the day, we have to continue to survive as a nation, right? I think one day the young people will become parents and you'll think about the same thing. How do I put food on the table? How do I ensure roof over my head? Those are real issues, I agree that some people may not be happy with the way we have organized society, but nothing is cast in stone. We can always evolve and change. And if there's a better model out there that can achieve the same outcome, yet at a lesser price to pay in terms of people's happiness and wellness, so be it. So I would like young people to be involved in this because I've always said, Singapore is always a work in progress. It's never completed, it's never done. It's not about building another new building, but building a better society that all of us can thrive in and the human spirit can continue to flourish. That would be my message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. And I think it is in that spirit that you see younger people wanting the PAP to still be in power, but a more diverse parliament.
Yes. I accept that. I accept that.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Yaacob. You've always been a gentleman to me. I just wanted to acknowledge. I wanted to acknowledge that. And please ask your teammates to come on my show as well.
You have to ask them. I cannot be your
okay. I cannot
be your marketing manager.
Okay.
Good night,
thank you
everybody.
so much. Okay. Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Bye bye.